Hello, kids. Uh, I'm happy to be talking with you again, and I wanted to pick up with where we left off in the last video. So, in the last video, we were talking about, as we have been talking about, the behavior of the firm, right? So, so generally, what we're talking about in this whole subsection of microeconomics is how and why firms behave the way that they do. Why do firms behave as they do? And our argument, our assumption is that at the core, what motivates a firm in any industry is a desire to maximize profits, right? Now, that profit maximization strategy or eventually outcome is greatly influenced by the structure of the market in which the firm functions. And we talked a little bit about market structure. We said market structure involves a couple of components, several components. One being the number of firms in the industry, right? The second being the nature of the product the firms produce. The third being the control that the firms have over price, the influence that they have over price. The fourth being entrance and exit into the industry. Sometimes you'll see some books that refer to a fifth thing, the existence of advertising, but we don't usually talk about that. Now, we said that those characteristics, those components, define markets. And we have four subcategories of markets that we define, and one of those is perfect competition. A perfectly competitive market is one in which there's a large number of firms, and each of those firms is producing exactly the same thing, and none of those firms have any control over price, and it's easy for them to enter and exit the market. If that's true, we say if those characteristics hold true, then we say that the industry is perfectly competitive, and that firms in that industry would tend to behave in a certain way. Okay, now what would those firms want to do? Well, what those firms would want to do in that perfectly competitive industry is that they would want to maximize profits. Now, okay, in terms of maximizing profits, really the variables that are out there is that you would want to minimize costs, right? You would want to produce an appropriate output, and you would want to price at a certain price, right, in order to maximize your profits. Well, in a perfectly competitive market, we make a big assumption, and that big assumption is that there are so many firms in the industry, and they are producing exactly the same thing, that no one firm has any control over price. But since there are so many, right, that no one firm has any control over price, that those firms can sell as much as they want to. Now, this is a little bit harder to understand. The big defining characteristic of perfect competition is that the individual firm is so small, so infinitesimal, such a small part of the market that whatever they produce, they can sell at a market price that they have no control over. Now, the way that we illustrate that, and I talked about this before, is if we draw the upper right-hand quadrangle of a four-quadrangle graph, and we put on the vertical axis price, and we put on the horizontal axis quantity, and we pick a determined price, like $5, we would illustrate the demand curve that individual firm faces by just drawing a horizontal line at $5 and identifying and labeling that curve as demand. Right? The reason we would label it as demand is because at $5, that firm can pick any quantity that they want to sell. They can sell 100 units, 200 units, 2,000 units. It doesn't matter. Whatever they want to sell will be demanded because they're so small. But they have no control over price. It's a perfectly elastic demand curve. At a penny above $5, right? If $5 is the price, they'll sell zero. Right? So at $5, they can sell infinity. At a penny above, they sell zero. That's perfect elasticity. Now you might say, well, how could that possibly be true that they would sell zero? Well, consider the structure of the market. There are hundreds of thousands of firms selling exactly the same thing. So at $5, you can sell as much as you want, but if you sell it for a little, even a penny above that, then everyone will go to other sellers. And since they're selling exactly the same thing, they're perfect substitutes, right? They'll be able to buy it for $5 rather than 501, right? So I mean, this is hard to conceive. I mean, it would be like if you went to a farmer's market and there were 150 people selling corn there, 150 farmers selling corn, and all the corn was considered to be of equal quality. And the corn was selling for $3 a dozen, and one farmer wanted to sell it for $5. He wouldn't be able to do it because everybody would just go to the 3, right? I mean, so this is the same holds true in a perfectly competitive market. So then fundamentally, the only decision that the individual firm makes in a perfectly competitive market is how many units to produce, right? They don't have any control over price. And we said the last time in the last video that they'll want to produce as long as the marginal cost is less than the marginal revenue. So when they produce 10 units and the 10th unit costs them $2 to produce, but the marginal revenue is $5, then they'd want to produce that unit. At the 11th unit, if they wanted to produce and it cost them $2.50 and the marginal revenue is $5, they'd want to produce it. Now, as I'm talking about this, I keep making a reference. I said the marginal revenue is $5 because the big deal. This is a big deal in perfect competition. I want you to note this. I'm sure Mr. Spinola talked about this as well. That in perfect competition, marginal revenue is equal to price. Marginal revenue is equal to price. P is equal to MR. Now, why is that true? Well, think about it. How much would revenue, if you sell every unit at a price, let's say $5, how much would revenue change when you sold an additional unit? $5, right? So then if you go back to the illustration you drew, where you had a vertical line down, which you drew and you put price there, right? And then you had a horizontal line, you put quantity, and then you put P equal $5 and drew a horizontal line and labeled it as demand, right? You could put equal marginal revenue, because the demand curve is equal to the marginal revenue curve, because how much marginal revenue are you going to get for every unit? $5. $5 from every unit. Marginal cost, on the other hand, is the marginal cost curve that we talked about in the last chapter. Oh, do you recall that, kids? Do you recall that? Oh, I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you don't recall that. But if you go back into chapter 8 and look for marginal cost, you would discover that the marginal cost curve falls, bottoms, and rises, right? Now, I would love it. Oh my goodness, I would love it if you could just, on the picture you drew a marginal cost curve that would fall, bottom, and rise. And you're going to note that it's going to intersect somewhere. The marginal revenue and the marginal cost are going to intersect somewhere. Where it intersects, drop down a line and put 100 units, right? Put 100. So we would say that this firm profit maximizes at 100 units, right? So the best it can be is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? That's the best circumstance it can be in. If it produces one more unit, it will make less profitability. Produce one less, there'll be profits that it could make that it won't, right? So the best it can be is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is profit maximization in every market structure. It doesn't matter whether it's perfect competition, it doesn't matter what it is, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost is where the firm's profit maximize. Now, where marginal cost equals marginal benefit is where everything maximizes. Satisfaction, if you're a consumer, and you say, okay, well, I'm consuming something. What does it cost and what does it benefit? Well, I keep consuming it as long as the benefit's greater than the cost. Right, so this notion where marginal revenue equals marginal cost applies to all kinds of human behavior. We argue this, right? Okay, now here's the interesting thing, and it is interesting that this is a review of it, and this is complicated. I know that, and I feel fortunate for you kids that you get to learn economics. How lucky you are, youngsters, that you learn economics. Unfortunately, you're learning it online rather than in an actual exciting classroom, right, where we could have dynamic instruction from Mr. Spinola, who would draw these illustrations, these beautiful illustrations that he would put on the board, and he would give you example after example. It would be wonderful, but we don't have that opportunity. So we're on the YouTube, doing this. But nevertheless, if you profit maximize at where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Do you make a profit? Now you might say, kind instructor, old, retired, bald instructor. My goodness, that's a ridiculous thing. You've profit maximized. Yes, you have, but we're not sure whether you've made a profit. And you say, how do you know that? Well, you make a profit, if total revenue is greater than total cost. If you look at the picture you drew, can you determine the total revenue? You can. You can, kids. If I was in class, I'd ask you this, and there'd be hands everywhere asking, wanting to answer, and you would say, all you would have to do is take the price times quantity. So if the price is 5 and the quantity is 100, the total revenue would be 500. Right? You can do that. Can you determine total cost? No, you can't determine total cost. What's missing, kids? Oh, I would wait. If we were in class, I would wait. I would tease this out of you. I would say, what's missing? I would have to wake a few of you up, I'm sure, right? And I would have to get a few of you to look up from your cell phones, right? But I would say, what's missing? What do we need to figure out total cost? And then some bright, young, sprightly kid would raise their hand in the air and say, oh, I think we need the average total cost curve to be added to this picture so we can determine profitability. That's a little more than we can add here without, having it. So I want you to get your textbook. I'll wait. Stop the tape for a second, get your textbook, and then in your textbook, turn to page 186. And there is an illustration on 186. No. Let's not turn to 186 first. Let's turn to page 184, the key graph. 184, the key graph. And there is an illustration there of what I'm trying to get across to you. Now go on that key graph that's on page 184 to 9 units. When you look at 9 units, what's true? Well, what's true is marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? You can see it. They have a little line there, MR equals MC. The marginal cost curve falls, bottoms, and rises. The marginal revenue curve is equal to $131, which is equal to the price. So at 9 units, the marginal cost is $131. The marginal revenue is $131. So producing 9 units is the best this firm can do. Is it making a profit? Well, if you take the marginal revenue, it would be 131 times 9. But if we look at the marginal cost, we say, or not the marginal cost, the average total cost curve, we say that the average total cost is 100. Well, the price is 131, right? And the price you're getting for every unit, so that's the average revenue. The cost per unit is 100. So on average, this firm is making $31 per unit. That's illustrated there by the green area. The area is shaded in green. And look, the difference is 100 or 31 minus 100, right? 31 is the average revenue. 100 is the average total cost, right? So 31 times 9 would be equal to the area of profit, and that would be the green area. Right? So in order to calculate whether this firm is making a profit, you have to add to the picture the average total cost curve. Right? And then once the average total cost curve is averaged, then you can say that this firm is making a profit. So when we look at that picture, this firm is making a profit. Now, if I had you in class, I would say this. I would draw this myself. Oh, and it would be, kids, I had colored chalk. I don't think Mr. Spinola has colored chalk, but I had colored chalk. And I used to illustrate this up on the board. And if I had you in class, I'd draw this and I'd say, okay, what is determining that this firm is making a profit? What's determining that? And if you thought about it, which I'm sure you won't, but if you did, one of you would say, well, the price is a variable in whether this firm makes a profit, and the cost curve that it faces is a variable, right? So, all right, if the price is 131, what happens to the firm? Well, the firm makes a profit. What if the price was 100? This firm has no control over price. Would the firm make a profit? Well, if the cost remained the same, the answer would be no, right? Because the at 100, right, the firm, the cost maybe it's 100. I mean, it's so if the price goes down, right, the profitability of this firm may go down with it. You see, so whether or not a perfectly competitive firm makes a profit depends upon the price, which they have no control over, that the market determines for it. So let's say I was a farmer, and so I'm a farmer, and I have no control over the price of corn, none at all, right? So I have all my costs, and I produce a corn, and I sell it by the bushel, right? And the price of a bushel of corn in a year is $7. Well, I look at my costs. It cost me $6 to make the corn. I make $1 a bushel. I did pretty well. Well, the next year, costs remain exactly the same, but now the market price for corn, which I have no control over, is $3. I lose $2 a bushel. Oh, wait a minute, right? The nature of perfect competition is just that. The individual firm has no control over the price of the product, right? So the profitability of that firm is utterly dependent on the market. Now, they can cost minimize, and you assume that they do. Now, the other thing that is true is if the cost curve shifts, if costs go up or costs go down, that could influence profitability as well. But more often than not, the individual firm has little control over that. If fertilizer costs go up and I'm a farmer, I don't have control over that. I got to pay it, right? If energy costs go up, I'm a farmer and I need energy, I got to pay it. So in perfect competition, the profitability of those firms is very much outside of the hands of those firms. The only decision they make is how much to produce. Now, if you turn now in your book to page 186, right, you could see there an example of a perfectly competitive firm that's actually making a loss, right? It's $71 of a price of the same thing. They're making a loss. Now, the interesting picture is on page 187, and that's one I used to love to do in class, and I